Said what I said. What do we got going on here? Other guys. Shout out to the Pontiac guys, I guess. I don't know. There's lots of different guys. How's everybody doing? It is 11:50. Today I want to talk about headers and exhaust manifolds. We've spoken about headers. I got a little bump on my nose. Something's going on. We've talked about headers and stuff a lot, but what I want to talk about specifically is I get lots of comments, particularly on the header videos and things, and on the cam videos more often than not. And usually the statement goes something like this: Why did you test this with headers? Why don't you test it with stock exhaust manifolds? You know, like in the real world. Okay, that's a viable thing. So in fact, I'm going to put our poll up for today. Headers. Okay, well, running a cam test with headers change the results versus running it with stock manifolds. So what we're talking about is if I ran a cam test. So if we go to richardholdnerperformance.com, we get a low buck truck camshaft, we take out the stock cam in our LM7 or LR4 or LQ4 or LQ9, we put that camshaft in and we do a direct comparison on how much power we gained. Hey, look, we just gained 60 horsepower. And did things in the curve that this camshaft does, good low speed power, good torque gains, all that. So it did all that. So we got that gain. So we ran that test, let's say like on a stock truck like mine, stock exhaust manifold, stock exhaust. We did a back-to-back test on the chassis dyno, let's say. We did that. Okay, we ran that test. We got these results. Okay, now if we did it on either another vehicle or on that vehicle, after we put long tube headers on it, and now we got long tube headers on it, feeding whatever that same stock exhaust, whatever you want to do. And then we ran that same cam test. We had the stock one in there. We optimized the air fuel and timing, ran it, took the low buck truck camshaft, swapped that in, ran that, and then we got our results, our before and after. We got some kind of power gain, obviously. We got some whatever happens with the curve. The question is one of those, well, we have several questions. First question is one of those more accurate than the other? So you guys let me know in the comments, is one of those more accurate than the other? And then the other question, as we're talking about in the results, is are those results going to be different? And so for right now, our poll is at 100%. We're running a cam test with headers, change the results versus running it with stock manifolds. 100% are saying yes. And that's correct. Kind of. It's sort of correct. The results will be different because the motor with headers will be making a different power curve. But here's where people get lost. And this is, I think, I think that the internet is partly to blame for this. I don't think that, I think I've been fairly clear about this in all the testing, but maybe I'm to blame also. So I blame myself. But here's what the difference is. The difference isn't, and this is what a lot of the misconception is, that somehow the camshaft will respond differently to the header equipped vehicle than it does to a stock exhaust manifold vehicle. Now, the results will 100% be different. So if you're answering the question at 100%, you're right. It is different. The difference is that if you take a stock motor that has stock exhaust manifolds on it and you put headers on it, you're going to change the power output. I have lots of videos up, header tests and stuff. In fact, those are very, very popular. People love to see that. So I'll be doing more of that. So if we put headers on it, I'm talking about long tube headers, really. The shorty headers don't change the power very much. So it's not that big of a difference really between those two. But if we put long tube headers on it, we know that changes the power. Usually picks up power everywhere. Picks up low speed power because we got a long primary length. We got good scavenging, picks up power down there, picks up power up top. So the header itself changes the power curve. We know that that's the case. But what will happen is the relative gains that you get from the cam are about the same. And I know, because I've done this test several times, where we've run our cam test back to back versus a stock cam versus a Super Richie, whatever, double throwdown cam, whatever the camshaft is, like the low buck truck camshaft or the truck plus camshaft. We put a camshaft in and we do that test back to back, stock versus a camshaft with stock exhaust manifolds. Then we do that same test, and this is a lot easier to just run the thing with the stock exhaust manifold and the headers with the stock cam, and then run it with stock exhaust manifolds and headers with the new cam, because rather than having to swap the cam twice, swapping headers is a lot easier to do. That's why logistically, that's why we do that. But we get the same results. So if we run our cam tests with stock exhaust manifolds, we get some kind of gain. And then we do that same test with headers, we get some kind of gain. That gain that we get is going to be fairly consistent, certainly as a percentage. But what happens is we start out making more power with the headers, and we end up making more power with the headers, just because the motor with headers makes more power. So it makes more power starting out, and it also makes more power once we put the camshaft in. The camshaft still gains, it might gain a little bit more with the headers, but as a percentage of the starting point, it's very, very comparable. So if we get our 60 horsepower gain, let's say, for instance, with the low buck truck camshaft, we're going to get about that. Maybe we get 62 or 63 or whatever. We get a little bit more when we have the headers in. But the real big thing is that we started out with more and then we ended up with more. And that's not the way a lot of people look at it. Unfortunately, they think, oh, headers. First of all, there are lots of guys who think, oh, headers just skew the test altogether. I have stock exhaust manifolds. I only want to see a test with stock exhaust manifolds. And so any test that I see that doesn't have stock exhaust manifolds is 100% invalid. You have that sect of people. But also, there's a bigger group of people than this nonsensical group, this small tinfoil hat wearing kind of nonsensical group. There's a bigger group of people that think that when we run this test with headers, that the results are completely different than they are when we run it with stock exhaust manifolds. And usually it's the other way around. You get lots of guys that we have more guys that have stock exhaust manifolds than have headers. And so a guy doing a test with that thinks, okay, well, you ran that test with headers, so none of that is valid because it's going to act completely differently on my stock exhaust manifold combination. And that's not the case. We see, and I have videos up where I have both sets of data there. And we see that the camshaft does what the camshaft does. It still makes good power down low with either one of those. It makes more power down low with the headers because headers do that. But it makes good power down low. It makes good power in the mid-range, like this low buck truck camshaft. Makes good power on the top. It still does that with both sets. And that's a common misconception. No, it only works with headers. No, that doesn't happen. In fact, I would argue, and maybe we'll have videos on this later on, that this same sort of thing happens with if I have, an upgraded cylinder head on there. So I've got a 4.8 or a 5.3, and I've got the TrickFlow 205 heads on there, or an Airflow Research set of heads, or ported stock heads, or something like that. Well, that completely, again, they go back to the same old thing, the same old default. That completely negates all of the power gains and all the testing and the validity of this as 100% whole. It completely negates all of this because you had the wrong cylinder head on it. And what they're really saying, and Jimmy and I were talking about this, I need to do a video on translating what people mean when they make a comment. And their comment is, hey, you didn't do the test the way that I wanted you to do the test. I wanted you to do the test on my thing. And that's all that I care about. And so everything else that isn't that is obviously invalid. And there's all the people out there want to see the test that I want to see because I'm important. That's the translation. But the same thing applies with cylinder heads and intake manifolds. If it's tested differently than you wanted to see it tested, then it's invalid. And more importantly, that there is something actually wrong with the data, that it wouldn't act that way with that setup. And that's just not true. If you do a back-to-back test, regardless of what the test subject is, what the motor configuration is, and you only change one variable, in our case, we're changing the camshaft. You go from starting with a stock cam to the other cam, you're going to see that kind of gain. That's what happens. Like I said, it might be a little bit more because the headers made a little bit more or whatever, but that's still going to happen. And it's still valid information, even though it's not the exact thing that you wanted to see. you can expect gains like that. If you put that low buck truck camshaft in, or a Chopacabra or Truck Norris or whatever kind of camshaft you're putting in a sloppy stage 2, and it gains that kind of power with headers, it's going to gain that kind of power with stock exhaust manifolds. Again, starting lower, ending lower with the stock exhaust manifolds, starting higher, ending higher with the headers. And that's what happens. And those are the kind of things, those are the kind of next level things that I want people that watch this channel regularly to understand. I want to get them to that understanding. I want to get them to that next level of understanding, and not just, hey, look, he did this test and it did this. And I can go online and say, hey, look, headers are worth this much, or cams are worth this much. Yeah, they are, under those parameters that we tested it on. That's what they do. And if I put a camshaft in, really the upshot of all this is, if you're going to do a cam swap and you're going to put something like that low buck truck camshaft in, or Truck Norris, Chopacabra, whatever it is, and you put a camshaft in, or you put a camshaft in, not one of the ones that I mentioned, that has similar kinds of specs to it, you should expect that kind of gain. It's going to do that, because it can't not, because of physics. So we'll see what you guys have to say. And then also, I want to get your input on some testing that I have coming up, and you guys can let me know what you think, should be testing. Darren there, untrue, untrue knowledge. X-Men. That's right. Dennis, Jet, Bill, BS, Rovers in the house. You got the first thumbs up? Nice. That's what you guys should do. That should be your goal in 2025. Of all the things that, all of your project goals and that kind of stuff, that your goal should be to get the first thumbs up. And also, and I don't mind you doing this, log out and come back and then put another thumbs up there. Get multiples. See who can get the most. It's an all new year, so hopefully we see lots of new content. Richard, I have a dream. Richard's Rovers and Rotaries, a series. Rovers and Rotaries. Wow, that would be oddly specific. Admittedly, a dream. Be fun to see Richard touching a Wankel engine. Wow. That sounds naughty. Just headers make power. Just a cam has some power. Put them together and you get synergy. Ruthless, what's going on? My old neighbor has a 64 Falcon Ranchero, much like on that. 260 V8. He put headers on it and the thing woke up. And a cam, he's hitting 6,500 like nothing. Yep, camshafts do that. Hoping to start an AFM DOD delete, Truck Norris tune, long tubes, exhaust on my 13 Silverado soon. Very good. You have all of that stuff and you're ready to go. Only start higher and end higher, in the words of Richard Rose. See, Tomlinson's got it going on. He knows. When computing header primary lengths for my 4.6 low RPM supercharged Rover project, I'm getting 42 to 48 inches of primary of only 0.8 to 125 using Vizard generic equation. Okay, let's go. For 1,500 to 3,500 RPM range. Okay. A little off topic. Are cam bearings worn out if you see some brass? No. And you're probably not seeing brass. You're probably seeing copper. Charlie Brown. Small minds don't want to know. What about inquiring minds? Try Blackheart hooker versus step headers. I've run step header tests. We have a set of step headers at West Tech, and guess what? They're not magic. Currently have an LS2 style intake and a Turbo 5.3 build I'm working on. What are the differences between LS2, LS3, and LS6 intake manifold? Well, an LS3 manifold is a rec port intake manifold, so it won't work on cathedral heads. An LS6 manifold and an LS2 manifold, the biggest difference that you'll see on those two is that the LS2 manifold has a 90 millimeter opening and the LS6 manifold has a 78 millimeter opening. And in my testing, the LS6 manifold makes a little more power than the LS2 manifold does, despite the fact that it has a smaller opening. The LS3 manifold, factory LS3 manifold, is really good on LS3 heads, on any sort of rec port head. And an LS2 intake manifold is good for a turbo setup. Every intake manifold ever made is good for a turbo setup. Hooker Blackheart cast finish. I don't know what you mean by that. Are you talking about a Hooker like cast iron exhaust manifold, and it will do what a stock manifold does. It'll be closer to that than it would be to a header because it has no length. Richard, always appreciate your content. Hope you have a splendid 2025. That's planned. I hope that happens. Just converted one of my 5.3 trucks to the stock True Dual 6.0 exhaust. I doubt it makes more power, but it sounds better. That's good. I want to do some testing with a dual exhaust into a single and then back into a dual and compare that to a dual, because I was told, and there's evidence now, that actually helps make more torque. Happy New Year, Charger. Actually, so you're blowing coffee out? BS? Every single 6-liter Escalade has a true dual catted pipe section after the manifold. The muffler is dual in, dual out, and then a single tip. Okay. I didn't know that they had a dual in, dual out on the 6-liters. I haven't seen a lot of them from underneath. I've seen mid-length headers on the market. Would I expect a mid-level gain compared to shorties? Yeah, it could be in between those two. Sloppy best cam of 6-liter results. Just saw LS1 and 5.3. Yeah, I probably won't do a sloppy best cam, I don't think. But we will do testing on my cams on a 6-liter coming up here pretty soon. I want to see 1 7/8 versus 2-inch headers. 2-inch headers are starting to show up everywhere, trying to see the torque loss of any. I need to look and see. I think the step headers that Westech has might be 1 7/8 to 2-inch, but I have to see. Is a dual to a single and back to a dual essentially the same as using an X pipe? No, it's not. I also have heard that an X pipe will increase power. In the testing that, and obviously the exhaust is going to be kind of combination and cam specific, but in the testing that Engine Masters did, they put an X pipe and an H pipe and a regular dual exhaust on stuff, and they did that test, and there's not a big change in power from the X pipe. It sounds really cool, but there wasn't a big change in power. X pipe helps with scavenging, or H pipe, I can't remember. Can you say, Riley, your Yukon is slow? Riley, your Yukon is slow. Who's Riley, and why are we talking smack about Riley? Just out of curiosity, what a marine style exhaust manifold with a water jacket or improved power with a colder exhaust temp? No, it actually hurts power. You want to keep exhaust temperature in there and cooling it off. Those marine exhausts always hurt power, but they do take noise out. And a water jacketed exhaust also helps if the motor is exposed to anything that you don't want it to burn, like even if it's enclosed, but inside that area, the water jacket exhaust for boats is pretty common. How much does displacement change the cam's power curve based on cam duration? Like, would a 305 with a 212 cam be similar in relation to a 350 with a 220 cam? Drew, why don't you go take a look at the test that I have up comparing a stock 4.8 and a 5.3 and a 6.0. And you can see what effect it had on having the same camshaft in all of those combinations did and where they made peak power. How many pounds of boost would you be comfortable with running through a stock LS2 intake manifold? Or it doesn't matter as long as you have a good blow-off valve. It does matter if you have a blow-off valve, because the blow-off valve is going to be before the closed throttle blade. So the manifold, the blow-off valve is not going to affect what's going on with the intake manifold anyways. So the pressure is going to be the situation when it's under boost for the manifold. And how much power are you trying to run? Like, we've run lots of boost on stock manifolds. You would be more likely to hurt it from a backfire or something. What's the max horsepower record for stock manifolds? Are you talking about using them for a turbo application or just an NA thing? You can't have it both ways. When you didn't see gains on a piston flip or the 4.7 cam swap, you can't say it doesn't work. It didn't in those builds. They weren't a cup level optimized build. I don't know what you mean by I can't have it both ways. Which ways am I talking about? My point in the piston flip thing was that it didn't work when we tested it. But people were saying that it does work on that application, and it doesn't, because I know, because we tested it. I can also tell you that the 4.7 swap didn't add any power on the combination that we tested it on, and it didn't work. I'm not saying universally it doesn't work. I'm saying it didn't work on those. 2025 goal is to machine my new 3.7 intake manifold with the stock volume and runner length in a different package. Factory cyclone intake is very ugly. My 3-year-old daughter says hi. Tell her what's up. Tell her my puppies say hello to her. Milo and Maya. Oh. Brady and Bruno. Do you need valve relief pistons for the low buck camshaft? No, the low buck truck camshaft fits stock piston to valve clearance. In fact, it'll fit stock piston to valve clearance even if you mill the dog snot out of the cylinder heads. It's got a ton of piston to valve clearance. Do I have to do a trunnion upgrade on my LS1 with 80,000 miles on it? Well, my truck has 350,000 miles on it and still has the original trunnions and rockers, and everything is still original. So I would say no. Thought that the 4.7 swap was a stability thing. They're changing the frequency by doing that. But I don't think that they're changing power. I'd like to see a 4.7 swap where everything else stays the same, like we did. And I'd like to see where there's a power gain. I want it to happen. I want those things to make power. I wanted the piston flip to show something. I wanted it to make power. But me wanting it and it actually happening is a different thing. We need LSA versus Torque Storm. Different runner length intakes for Torque Storm, both intercooled. What's better for the money? Yeah, I agree. That would be an interesting test. The LSAs are not cheap anymore, and it definitely has a short runner intake manifold. I suspect, having tested short runner positive displacement blower stuff versus centrifugal blowers, if you had them make the same boost wherever they make their peak boost amount, the low speed boost response of the positive displacement blower is still going to be better down low, even with the longer intake runner that you run with a centrifugal. It has in every test that I've run so far. Not looking to make crazy power, at least not at first. My goal is 700 to 800. Yeah, you're not going to have a problem with the intake manifold there. You don't have to be concerned with stuff until you're, I mean, we've run on factory manifolds, we run 25 pounds, so that's not an issue. Have you ever seen airfill ratios differ when wastegate dumps and bypasses the wideband as opposed to being routed back into the exhaust and read by the wideband? I don't know. The airfill should be the same in the exhaust in both sets of those exhausts. So I don't think that should change it, because you're not sampling a section that hasn't been measured or doesn't have the right air fuel. The only way that would happen is if you didn't have if the wastegate was over one or two of the cylinders that actually had a different one and you routed that back in. I don't know why the exhaust would be different there than it is everywhere else. Lexi Dyno runs for a 4.7 at very low RPM from 1,500 to 4,000, just to compare to my 4.6. What 4.7 are you talking about? I have a 4.8 with flat top pistons. How big of a cam can I go before I need to worry about piston to valve clearance? Somewhere in the mid 230s. The 4.8 actually has less piston to valve clearance because of the stroke length than others do, but it also depends on what cylinder head you have on there, because the valve drop on the different heads is different. But you can put a really big camshaft in there, and the camshaft on a 4.8 is already relatively bigger than it is on a 5.3 or a 6.0 because it's a smaller motor. So even when we were doing the testing, even a 224 cam on a 4.8 was making peak power at 7,000. You want to see Dyno runs at 1,500 RPM? Yeah. No, that's a hard pass at wide open throttle at 1,500 RPM. But I'm curious to see yours. I'd be more likely to do that on a chassis dyno than doing it on an engine dyno. I think stabbing the throttle on a chassis dyno, like at 1,000 RPM or whatever, if that's what you would do this on a stick car and not on an automatic, because then you get converter flash by doing that. But we have on a lot of the chassis dyno stuff on a manual trans car, particularly, I remember doing a lot of this with Jim Bell over at Kenny Bell, and then 1,000 RPM, you just nail the throttle, and because he likes seeing that, because he has a positive displacement twin screw supercharger on something, whatever we're testing it on, a 462 valve or whatever it is. And so at 1,000 RPM, you just nail the throttle. I don't know that, like I said, I've argued this many times. I don't know where people would be doing that in the real world, out on the street. I don't know where you'd be doing. Nobody does a fourth gear roll on starting from 1,000 RPM. If you're doing that, you have to drive differently. You have to be in a different gear, and things will work out better for you. But that can be done on the chassis dyno for somebody that wants to see this low RPM number for whatever reason. But on the chassis dyno, it's not a stationary load, so it just rolls through that. So it'd be easier on stuff, I think. LQ9, 823 heads, BTR stage 4 cam, piston to valve. I don't know what stage 4 cam you have. You have to tell me what it is, but probably not. We've run the stage 4 LS3 cam and not had piston to valve clearance on a flat top piston 5.3, and the LQ9 has the same stroke as that, and it's a flat top piston, so I don't think so. And the 823 head has actually a different valve drop than the other stuff. I think it actually has more piston to valve clearance. Have you tested or seen adverse effects when you mount the wastegate on the turbo housing? I've never tested that, and I've never tried that. I don't know what the problem would be, other than you drilling a big hole in the mount in the housing. And I don't know how that would affect the integrity of the housing itself. Like, would you propagate cracks from there or something? That would be the only thing that might concern me. Otherwise, I think Matt's done that a bunch. Real world power. You agree with Bell? What is Bell? Oh, Jim. Real world power at 1,000 RPM. What does the speed at which an engine gain RPM affect cam profile? For example, 5 seconds. That was freaky. 5 seconds between 4 to 7 versus 2.5 seconds. Do you compensate with ramp rate, or does it matter in terms of stability? Do you think, are you asking if the load profile needs to be different based on acceleration rate? So the acceleration rate would be different in each one of the gears. We also can adjust acceleration rate in the testing, and you do get different power curves, different power numbers if you change the acceleration rate. But the cam stays consistent for all of that. Just set the idle screw at 1,500 and then stab it. Is the initial hit of nitrous at, say, under 3,000 RPM what breaks things? You'd be more likely to break something hitting the nitrous below 3,000 RPM than hitting it after that. And the reason for that is you're adding, with nitrous, you're adding the same amount of power, the same amount of horsepower at 3,000 that you would at 6,000. But the corresponding torque number at 3,000 is much, much higher in terms of the gain that you get. You get way more torque adding 100 horsepower at 3,000 than you do adding 100 horsepower at 6,000. Anything past 52, you're adding more horsepower and less torque. 862 heads on my 4.8 with a laptop piston, with a flat top, I'm sure that is. Piston questions on how big of a cam before a piston to valve. You just need, like I said, it's going to be in the mid 230s will fit. It pays to enrich your world. You need to help G&G with their RX-8. What is G&G? And do they have a turbo rotary in their RX-8, or have they LS swapped it like a lot of guys have? If everything looks good with the valve train, would you swap the cam or take the time to do new lifters and lifter trays? To do that, you're going to have to take the heads off. When we do cam swaps, normally we do not take the heads off. We would swap cam, or we would swap the cam. We would swap the springs with the head still on, and then run it. If you have a very high mileage motor, like my 350,000 mile motor, I would take it apart, and then I would put, I probably wouldn't change the lifters. I'd probably still run them because that's what I do. But now anymore, I would change the lifter trays because I know that those are worn out. They have to be with that many miles on it. Gas and gear channel stock 13B. Okay, I'll have to check that out. I'd like to run a 12A or a 13B on the dyno and just do a header and, you know, some intake manifolds and turbos. So I think it'd just be fun. I haven't done any engine dyno testing on a rotor. We've done some chassis dyno stuff with them. Exhaust header as a percentage shot, normally improved power. Normally my engineer tutor taught me to use dimensional analysis. I mean, couldn't you just dyno test it and then you use the you use the dyno and says, yes, there was a gain. 26B, so that's more. That's 2 times. Is that a 4 rotor? Split duration cams are normally to help the exhaust to flow as a crutch. That's, well, you might, a lot of people will tell you that, but there's more to the camshaft than that. If the exhaust headers are efficient, does that affect the ideal duration? Well, the conversation that I would have with you is that the concept that there is an ideal duration, and there's not. There's not an ideal overlap between or you know, split between intake and exhaust. What you want to do is tailor the cam for the thing that you're trying to achieve. What is that? And then let's make a camshaft to achieve that. Do you want lots of torque? Do you want lots of horsepower? Do you want a good idle quality? Do you want the cam to be inexpensive and not do a custom cam? There are a lot of things that I would ask that have nothing to do with this intake to exhaust flow relationship. Take a look at, CJ, take a look at the test that I did where we ran a cathedral port cam and a rec port cam, one of them with a big split intake to exhaust, because we know that an LS3 head has way more intake flow and the same exhaust flow as the cathedral port head. And the cathedral port head has the same exhaust flow, but way less intake flow. So a big difference in intake to exhaust flow relationship. And then we ran both heads with both cams. And then we ran 2 cams, one that has a conventional intake to exhaust split, and then that one has a big intake to exhaust split, you know, because we're favoring the camshaft to the LS3 head. And both combinations did the same thing. The camshaft does the same thing with both heads. I have experienced lifter tray failure firsthand. It's not pretty. I did that. The 4.8 was like that, and the one that I had to put back together and fix because it damaged a bunch of stuff. A real world scenario I can think of: wide opening at the engine in a gear at 1,000 RPM is when stuff happens on the highway and you turn off your mind and you punch it. So where would you be running 1,000 RPM? No, nowhere. 2,000 RPM on the freeway. Yeah, that's a real thing. Because 2,000 RPM would be a highway cruising speed for something that's modern, that has an overdrive trans and stuff. But if this is an automatic and you put your foot in it, it's just going to downshift. If you have a 5-speed or a 6-speed and you just put your foot in it, then that could happen. My argument would be, why would you do that? And you should downshift like the automatic did. Luckily, it didn't damage the lifter bores. Talk about a buzzkill. Yeah, when it rotates and takes the cam out, it doesn't like spinning in that direction. BS, you want to run a variable carburetor? If the variable Venturi carburetor acts like we think it can, I would argue, well, not argue, I would just say that the variable Venturi carburetor helps to give you the right air fuel under various throttle openings. Lack of thought for you. No, we're all guilty of that. Like and it's good that your first reaction is more throttle. Most people's reaction on the freeway to anything is brake, which is not a very good idea. Where does the LT1 run into piston to valve or retainer to seal clearance issues? At a much smaller cam than the LS, and particularly the L83. Oddly enough, the smallest motor, they put the least amount of piston to valve clearance in it on the L83. So you can run you can run a bigger cam on an LT1 and an L86 than you can on an L83. And also the big problem with those is variable cam timing. So you have to start limiting the amount of sweep that you have available. On the 6-liter, any point in revving past 6,500, seems like most of your videos on it seem to flatten out right there. Just bought a 5,000 stall, got to get 8,000 mud truck moving. 3,000 was very lazy. Yeah, the displacement and the RPM are not related. You can make a 6-liter run to 8,000 or 9,000 or 10 or 11,000 if you want to do that. So you can make it do that. You just have to give it the things that it needs to do that. It being a 6-liter doesn't limit that. The things that you put on it are going to have to be relatively bigger than it would be for a 4.8, but you can still make it do that. You just have to put enough cylinder head flow in it, a big enough camshaft, and a short enough runner intake manifold, and it will do that. And then you have to fix all of the things that are making it not an 8 or 9,000 RPM motor. Listening to the live feed while I finish up wiring a Holley Terminator X for a customer. Fun is not what I'd call this. Wiring is my least favorite. That's a lot of people feel that way. A big bang on a 1-liter ECA series 3-cylinder Honda. I don't know what that is. I'm not familiar with that particular Honda. 1500 on the freeway is a real thing. It's an old 5-speed Disco 1 with a tall off-road tire. Downshifting is fine, but diesels and big blocks have spoiled me. I'm at a 90s LT1. Oh, okay. I think a 90s LT1 has the same small block Chevy kind of stuff. Displacement adds torque. Yep, that's true. I'd love to do the restricted exhaust type versus cam exhaust overlap test, like the restricted port FE. On the LQ4 with a truck plus cam, what would be a good stall speed? No, Eric, an LQ4 with a truck plus cam, I might put a little bit of converter in. On a 6-liter, I think you could get away with it would work, I think, with a stock stall converter. You would gain performance if you put more converter in there. If you put a 2500 in there, let's say, it definitely would improve performance. And it would improve performance even with a stock cam. The first gen, the Honda Insight engine was a 3-cylinder. Random question. Has anyone used a supercharger from a 3800 on a 4.8 and 5.3? Yeah, I have. I just put up a video just within the last few days of all the testing that I did with that M90 on the V8 stuff. So we tested everything. I made 650 horsepower, something like that, with a heavily modified supercharger, ported, bigger inlet, bigger throttle body. It was on a really good motor. It was on a 5.3, but there's lots of 4.8 and 5.3 stuff with that supercharger. So you could take a look at that one video and not have to look at the 10 or others that are up there. On the other hand, using as much RPM band as possible in whatever gear I can is really entertaining. Yeah, lots of guys like the rev. I mean, that's why even the OEMs, especially the supercar stuff, guys like high RPM motors, and there's no doubt about it. Making it sing is pretty cool. I'd love to see a Volvo B230 FT big bang just to see what they can handle. I'm still running 16 pounds of boost at my 400,000 mile 740. Very nice. Predator carb variable valve of VVC example is to suggest part throttle like low RPM loading of the motor. What is a safe number before LS 4.8 block needs decked or heads? Or the heads need machined? What are you talking about? What, a safe number of what? Yeah, we've done we've done a lot of M90 testing. What should I do to learn more about modifications to the head and throttle body of my 6-liter Silverado? You don't need to do anything to your throttle body. And the first thing that you should do on an LS is a cam and springs. And I wouldn't worry about cylinder head stuff. If you want to do a cylinder head on a 2003, you have a 317 head. A lot of guys put 706 heads on there, or a 243 or 799 head on there, because you will raise the compression and then you'll add a bunch of torque and they'll be happy. Did you do the M90 giveaway at Christmas? No, we didn't do any M90 giveaways. I have 317 heads going on an LQ4 with flat top pistons and a thinner MLS head gasket. Will it gain enough compression to get a benefit from the flow of the 317s have to offer? Compared to what? Compression will help any motor. It has nothing to do with flow. So you putting a thinner head gasket on it and flat top pistons both of those will raise the compression, and raising the compression is good. But the thing that you need to take advantage of the flow potential of the head is camshaft and then intake manifold. I phrased my statement wrong. I meant as low in the RPM range all the way to red line. Example, nailing it from 1500 to 6000. So Rob, now I got to go back up and read what your question was. On the other hand, as much of the RPM band as possible in whatever gears I can is just really entertaining to me. So you want a power band from 1500 to 6000? Every engine has that. It's just that some are better than others. Did you do a Thompson blast plate test? I don't know what that is. Any test on mild to wall carb 6-liter 6.2, preferably the 6.2? Yes, I got lots of carbureted tests up on the channel. I'd like to do a 230, 236 on a 108 and my carbureted 4.3 liter. Is that going to fit? Is there enough piston to valve clearance on the 4.3 for that? Speaking of Predator carburetors, I ran one on the goat for a few months at Baylands. It wasn't good compared to a 650. Is making comparable NA power to the LT6 5.5 liter possible with a 5.3 Gen 5 LT or LS 5.3 liter? What does that motor make? It's definitely possible. If we're given the same displacement, it's possible to make that kind of power, but it's just expensive. And that's also a 4-valve motor, so it's with all kinds of trickery done to it, where the OEM had millions of dollars to develop it. But yeah, there's 5.3 liter, I'm sure, drag race motors. I'm sure a 5.3 liter cup motor, or even more so, a drag race motor, could easily surpass the 600 horsepower, whatever that thing makes. So if we did some multiplication, 325 times 2.2. Yeah, you could go. There are guys that are probably making 2.2 or 2.3 horsepower per cubic inch, and maybe more than that on a really, really high compression, dedicated drag race only thing. It wouldn't be something that could drive around like that motor does, though. I've been porting 706 heads for a 408 with a low buck truck camshaft and shrouded the valves, blended the seats to the ports, and took out the rocker bolt hump. What gain do you think? I don't know. Head porting can be all over the board, from making the flow worse to making it the same, to making it a little bit better, to making it a lot better. So I don't know, without flowing those, what the gain would be. I believe it's reasonable based on what I've seen, particularly with a positive displacement supercharger on 400 cubic inches. So now are you talking about, I thought you were talking about the NA motor. What is acceptable variance from cylinder to cylinder compression test? You'd want them to be pretty close. I don't know. I mean, I run stuff with lots of variance from wrecking yards, but you'd like them all to be maybe 5 or 10, depending on what the total pressure is. I think P7 heads are 114 CFM more than Edelbrock. I don't know what engine family that is. What's your opinion on solid roller lifter for street use? Bushed or needle bearing? I want the valve train stability at RPM, but don't want one to trash my engine. Engine will see 10,000 miles a year. What engine family is that? I wouldn't do it on an LS. I don't like solid roller stuff for street use because I haven't seen an issue with RPM potential unless are you trying to do 7,500 or 8,000 on your big block? 5.5 LT6 factory is 670 horsepower. Yeah, I think that's doable, like I said, but it'd be a very, very peaky kind of motor. If a cam recommends a 2800 to 3200 stall converter, I'm running a 22 to 26. How much am I losing? I don't know. What is the stall speed? If that's a 400 RPM is a big range, like what is the power output of your NA motor down in that range? Or is yours stalling at 2200 or is it stalling at 2600? And then it would be, you'd have to measure that as a function of acceleration. Does one accelerate better than the other? And it'll also depend on what your camshaft is. Is your camshaft doing well at 2600 versus 3200? Does replacing heads cam intake on LS compromise smog regulations? Yes, unless you put in smog certified stuff, emission certified stuff, then it's not emissions legal. Big block Mopar is an engine family for the solid roller 7,000 RPM shifts. You can run hydraulic roller stuff at 7,000 without any problem. But you're obviously you ask me my opinion. That's my opinion. I don't like solid roller stuff for the street. I don't think that the solid roller lifter stuff lasts very long. There are some expensive solid roller stuff that has oiling, but I don't think that those are designed for street use. 1,500 to 6,000 with either a 400-inch NA or below that with a positive displacement supercharger like a Roots or Twin Screw. I'm not expecting a flat torque curve just without hurting it over time. Your odds of, if you have something that's making boost at 1,500 RPM, your odds of hurting it are very big. I have one cylinder 15 PSI weaker than the highest reading cylinder. But how far it off, blue collar, how far it off is that cylinder from the average of the cylinders? So if you've got a bunch of them that are 190 and you got one of them that's 208 and the other one that's 184 or whatever, it's not that far away from the average of the other ones. You got one overachiever, one underachiever. I would just run it. Any tips for getting surface rust off a cam that's been sitting? Yeah, you could use WD-40 and Scotch-Brite or something and see if it will come off. Marshall, you got good low end but no top end? The world's small Chevy Motown LS headed, but instead of hammerhead Hemi heads, that's what you want to do? I built an electric supercharger for an RX-8. I'm thinking of modifying it to use on the 4.6. This would let the 42-inch runner intake fit under the hood. I've never run any electric superchargers. I've never seen one that has the voltage capacity to move a lot of airflow, because it takes a lot to drive a supercharger that can support 300, 400, 500, 600 horsepower. What brand hydraulic roller would you recommend? Probably Isky. I don't do a lot of Mopar stuff, so I don't know which ones would be good for a Mopar, but I like the Isky stuff for big block Chevys. What's the best intake manifold, my Silverado? If you do canvas rings, there's no best. It'd be better if you tell me what kind of power you're trying to make. And odds are that the intake that you have on there already works good. An upgrade from the factory truck intake manifold is a Trailblazer SS, and then a fast is going to make the most power in the RPM range that you're going to be running it in, but it's not inexpensive. What about solid flat tappets? I'd be leery of that, only because the concerns that people have with the cams lasting and stuff. If I was going to put a solid flat tap in a driver, I would have the cam nitrided probably, and maybe the bottoms of the lifters too, maybe DLC or something, just so that I knew that they would last. Most are at 160. Number 8 is 150, and I have 1 or 2 at 165. Nope, I'd run that. Would you do anything different when sizing a turbo for a manual versus an automatic? I think you could. I don't think that I would. I don't think that I would look that nitpicky at it. I would be looking more at the power that I wanted to make, and then the displacement of the motor and the naturally aspirated power output. But I think you could get away with a slightly smaller AR on a manual. But again, when you do that, regardless of whether you're doing that with an automatic, if you're trimming the hot side flow, you're going to have more back pressure. So you're going to do that regardless. But if stabbing the throttle at 1,000 RPM, like these guys are talking about, was really important to you in your manual transmission car, and you want to build boosts so that you can be in the crazy detonation prone area, then you could go with a tighter AR. Speeding the piston up via shorter rods will let you build more power down low, anti-detonation due to reducing dwell time at TDC. So you're thinking a short rod is going to help that? Dean, this is your happy place? We all try to bring happiness here. Have you used a company performance distributors? Most aftermarket distributors seem to be not good. David Visor recommended them. I think we have run their stuff at Westech a couple of times. I've never run one in a vehicle, though. I've never run one for a long period of time. It's been a long time since I had a vehicle that had a distributor that I drove around. So the Camaro, the Z, probably that little Jensen Healy had one. And then the motorcycles, the Mustang, the MR2, all those are late model fuel injected stuff. A short rod will 100% help. Okay. Running a 2200 to 2600 stall converter, but at about 13 to 1400, I start overpowering the foot brake. How much CFM of head flow at 600 would you consider enough to support 600? Well, if you're really good, it depends on what you're doing with the motor, but the rule of thumb is 300 CFM for 600 horsepower. You just double it, double the peak flow. That's assuming your cam goes to 600 lift. But that's what I do. Most guys don't make that. Some of them make way more than that. I've seen guys do 2.2, 2.3, horsepower per peak CFM. But again, that depends on what the motor's doing. So if you have a dedicated race motor that's a high compression, dry sump, has the right kind of cam and the right kind of induction system on it, you can do a lot better. If you have an LS that has a truck manifold on it and not high compression and no dry sump, it's going to be much harder to get that. But the head will certainly support that. Davis, has always been good stuff from my experience. So you've had experience with those distributors? DUI distributor, that's why I want the Motown with hammerhead Hemi heads. Okay, so you want to run a distributor with an LS thing? with that block that accepts the hammerhead heads. Okay. Cool. What is that for? Is it for drag racing or what are you doing with it? Would off-idle boost be any different in terms of tuning from a turbo versus a positive displacement? Yeah, I don't know how you would make boost off-idle with a turbo, but you would be more apt to do that with a positive displacement supercharger. I don't know how you do that on an automatic equipped car because you would go immediately to the stall speed. If you could build boost at like your off idle, to me would be like 1,000 RPM or less, because idle is like 600 RPM. So off idle would be 1,000 RPM. I don't know how you get that with a turbo. You could get it with a blower. If you're building boost at 1,000 RPM, obviously it's not going to have any timing in it. Problem with low RPM boost is piston dwell time. You got to speed it up. The problem is Rob wants to run 6,000 RPM too. Should be okay, but we're a little too much dwell time at that point. Any idea what? Does anybody know what 2V Cleveland heads flow? I'm going to say to low to mid 200s probably. I've heard of diesels making boost at idle. Well, the turbo is running wide open throttle, and so it has no restriction going into the turbo. It just doesn't have any load. And then they're throttling it with fuel. So I don't know, maybe that's possible if you're measuring it between the turbo and the motor. 2V US or Aussie. I think that those heads, I think the ports are the same, aren't they? I think that the only difference is the chamber. Shorties increase low end torque, but long tubes make more top end power. You can't have your cake and eat it too. That's actually not accurate. Shorties don't increase low speed torque. Shorties do very little gain versus stock exhaust manifolds. Long tubes add low speed power and mid range and top end. Long tube headers increase power all the way through the RPM range, and shorties don't do that. I've used them on Ford 6s, but DUI has really big caps. Do they use all of the HEI based stuff? 2V US was open chamber, 2V was closed. The chambers are different, but I don't know if the flow rate's different. I don't know if the port design is different. Does flipping the top on a TBI filter or carbureted engine get you any gains? Yeah, it can, because usually the snout that's on that style of air cleaner can be smaller than the motor needs. And so what you've done is basically introduced a bigger opening for it to breathe through. It sounds cool, especially if you have a quadrajet. But also you can improve power by adding flow into the carburetor or TBI, depending on how big the opening is in the air cleaner assembly versus how much power the motor's making. But it does sound glorious though. Would it be worth going to 11-to-1 from 10-to-1 on the Sentra? It's a free upgrade. It will make more power, definitely, but you narrow your tuning window. And I don't think you need to do that with a blower that you have. 206 CFM, 500 lift, Dean is saying on the Cleveland heads. I'm wondering if it really did make a difference. You would need to actually measure it to see. I mean, did it make 1 or 2 horsepower? Maybe it did, but it sounds like a lot more. So that's really a good thing. That's like putting an exhaust on. I put these mufflers on. It sounds amazing. It's got to be making a lot more power. The other mufflers weren't really a flow restriction, but they definitely sound different. Long primaries are ready for low speed, just like the intake manifold. Cheesecake or flour cake? Yes. There was one CFM difference between 57cc 302 Cleveland 2V and the 83, 81 2V 209. Okay. Yeah, and that would be that sort of difference you might see between two different guys testing it, or two different of the same cylinder head, just casting variances. I want zucchini bread. Zucchini bread's good. VGT will make boost anytime, but fixed turbos on diesels need RPM. Well, a variable vane turbo is not, doesn't have an infinite range. It's still doing what that turbo does relative to the displacement and output of the motor. It's just giving more of that. Cleveland trick flow 2V heads. My fourth flow of 315 at 600. My 4.3 doesn't pull past 4,500. So if I turbo, will it be all lowish RPM? Yes. If you have whatever power curve you have, wherever that thing is making power, and you put boost to it and you run the same amount of boost everywhere, it's just that curve making peak power at the same RPM, just elevated. It just is making a lot more now. It's making 50% more at 7.5 pounds of boost, let's say. Are equal length headers considerably better? No. In fact, almost none of the headers that we've run at Westech are equal length headers on any of the LS stuff. And equal length shorties are nonsense. Particularly on the 5-liter stuff back in the day, all they did was be more apt to burn the spark plug wires. You can see that a really nice, modern, smaller intake runner, 2V size, high port head, Cleveland alloy can outflow a 4V iron Cleveland. The CHI stuff is considerably smaller ports, and they flow more than a 4V Cleveland does. I need to look at more dynographs. What does larger displacement and roots twin screw do at 2,000 RPM and below? Always thought it did more unless you start using the cam intake for over. Yeah, if you add displacement, you add power everywhere, including down at your 1,000 RPM or 2,000 RPM. If you add a positive displacement supercharger, can also add boost there. Richard, I asked BTR for dyno information on the truck house cam, but it seems like they don't want to share it. Okay. I can ask Brian if they ran it. I had a variable nozzle turbo in my last Rover, and it made max boost at 1,200 RPM. On a diesel, right? True diesel trick that can be used is compound charging, also known as sequential turbos. Compound is different than sequential. You can use a turbo and a supercharger for better effect. One UZ-FE Cyclone merged 8-into-1 sounds like a Formula One car. I do like the 8-into-1 exhaust. They sound good. For sure, like removing the air horn on a 780 3134 barrel, its improvement isn't really measurable, except on a dyno. Yeah, that was a big thing back in the day. I remember the stage 2 or 3 carburetor Holly that we had from the carb shop. That's what it was. It was a milled air horn, and that was part of the things, and 4-corner idle circuits and stuff. There. Let's see. You guys can help me answer a question. Oh, that's not it. Okay. We'll worry about that later. Anyone else a fan of the sound of an old 5-liter made with Flowmasters? Does anybody like the Flowmasters on the? I'm not a fan of Flowmasters on the 5 liters. That FSC everything. After owning a vehicle with a cam, everything else is boring. You need to step into the world of boost. Wait till you run a turbo thing, whatever it is. What would be the best way to achieve 600 horsepower NA from a 6-liter on stock internals? You could get there. It's a lot easier if you have a flat top piston 6-liter, but it's going to take everything. It's going to take really, really good aftermarket cylinder heads, ported ones, a really, really good intake manifold, and a really big camshaft, the biggest one that you can fit in there to get 600 horsepower NA, and headers and a tune and all, and obviously all that. It's really expensive to make that much NA power. I want to put it in my L92 417 stroker. Let's see what you were talking about, Mr. Martinez. Oh, you want to put that truck Haas cam in there? Okay. Is it just because you like the noise, the name of the camshaft? If I put a root supercharger on a manual 4-liter Ranger making 300 wheel horsepower at 4,500, and I want to floor it below 2,000 RPM and secondary, don't floor it below 2,000 RPM. No, you can. You just have to have the tune correctly. You have to have no timing in it. You have to make it so if you do that, that it doesn't detonate itself to death. And you do that by controlling the amount of boost that it makes and the tune. Love the old Flowmasters. A lot of guys do. I mean, they sold a bajillion sets of those Flowmasters, and people love them. Like I said, just not my thing. Not my jams. Gonna close out our poll. What happened to our 100%? Running a cam test with header change of results versus running with stock manifolds. 90% say yes, it changes stuff. I want to take this build on road trips, but I'd like to assume how much horsepower I'll make with a truck intake and Texas Speed LS3 brawler heads. What is that? What are the specs on that truck house cam? Have you ever run wide open throttle boxes on a vehicle? What's a wide open throttle box? Is that chop you hear on a 427 LS, or is that just the cam? Which 427 are you talking about? Are you talking about a factory one? A factory one, you're not going to a factory LS7, you're not going to hear chop on because it doesn't have that. It has a fairly smooth idle because it has a mild camshaft in it. What mufflers do I like? I liked the Borla exhaust that I had on my Mustang. I also like the Super Trap exhaust that I had on there, but that was restrictive though. When I was a kid, my dad had a Grand National. I always wanted him to do burnouts. Those are cool. What does a dynograph look like when you have a camshaft that's too big for the intake and heads? You're thinking about it incorrectly. It's not too big for the intake and heads. You can take a motor and put a stock camshaft in it, and then put a bigger camshaft in it, and then put a bigger camshaft in it. And what will start to happen after you start going up is the motor will stop. First thing will happen is you'll start losing power down low and only gaining power up top, and then you'll stop gaining power up top. Because the heads in the intake manifold, other things are restricting the gains that you get from the camshaft. And if you have lots of head flow and lots of intake flow, like for instance, if you have an LS3, which is that, and you have a stock camshaft in it, you could see what that curve looks like. And then you could see, because I have a test up where we ran a 224, a 227, and a 231 cam, and you can see what changes those made. And so you could answer your question. It's not doing the thing that you're thinking. It's not restricting stuff the way that you're thinking. Everything I've seen, Flowmasters kill horsepower. Six cc dish piston, 71 cc chamber around 10.7 to 1. Truck house cam is 219, 230 something. Okay. 112. That's actually going to be a fairly mild cam on a 417-inch motor. It's probably gonna idle. Well, it's probably gonna idle fairly nice. Super traps, I haven't heard that in a long time. Good dirt bike mufflers. They were motorcycle mufflers, and that's why I picked them, because my buddy had a RD400 back in the day when we were in high school, and I thought it sounded cool. And I like the ability to tune it with the super trap things, but the tuning it was just take all that stuff out and just let it run open. I think boilers really flow well too, if I remember correctly. Yeah, the exhaust wasn't restricting the power output of this motor, so that wasn't a problem. I think it was a 2.5-inch exhaust, and I had a supercharged 302, and I don't think I was leaving much on the table there. And there's lots of different exhausts that would do that also, that weren't leaving power on the table. 600 horsepower, 6-liter LQ4 AFR TFS rec ports, high ram or Trinity intake. 233, 250 cam seems feasible. Yeah, like I said, it just takes everything. It takes really good heads, which those are good. An airflow research heads, an LS3 heads are really good head, or the trick flow LS3 heads are good. There's you could do it with cathedral port stuff too, because all those cathedral port heads will probably get there. A high ram is certainly enough intake manifold. A Trinity is going to lose power until the very, very top. A fast manifold might get you there also. That 233, the BTR stage 4 LS3 camshaft is enough to get you there. Switchfire versus X-pipe. I don't know what Switchfire is, but the sound quality changes with X-pipes. Not sure on everything, but you can get sound by messing with the over-under timing tables. You can tune different idle qualities and chop into it to an extent. How does a Trailblazer SS get away with 10.9 to 1 compression at 4,500 pounds plus a tow rating and some kind of... No, it's running on the knock sensors. You have really good knock sensor technology. No one gets 100% in your class. I don't ever do that. My problem is I want 500 wheel horsepower, but I want to go on road trips. So if you have Martinez, you have the stroker motor. A stroker motor is a lot easier to get 600 flywheel horsepower with, which is 500 wheel horsepower. It's a lot easier to do that with that size motor than it is a 6-liter. Yeah, the stroker motor, and honestly, I would argue that on the stroker motor, the benefit of that is that, and I don't think you're going to get there with that camshaft because I think it's too small. But the nice thing about the stroker motor is not the peak power that you get, but all of the power that you get below that is going to be like way better than a 6-liter. And that's what you're going to enjoy more. Should I go S480 for a streetcar? For what application? If money was an issue, I have the LQ9 short block, fast, just not the budget for a set of killer heads. A PRC 243 ported stock heads, really properly ported stock heads, will definitely get you there because they flow 320 or 330. Let me get you more information. Yeah, just 383. Tell me what kind of power you're trying to make. Tell me what size the motor is. And if you can tell me the mods on the motor, I can tell you what's going on. I love the torque curve. BTR also has an NA stroker cam that's a bit bigger. Do the X pipe and cross pipe perform differently, sound differently? An X pipe and an H pipe do definitely sound differently. The change in performance is not dramatic as the sound. Why did the Oldsmobile 403 get such a bad rap? I don't know. Maybe because it was in the mid 70s when everything was smoggy and not doing well. It was never really given much in the way of cylinder head and camshaft and compression and intake manifold that it needed to make the power that it could given that displacement. Drew, you don't want to ask that question one more time. 3 is probably enough. What would you run on what, Charlie Brown? I don't know what you're asking. You should run whatever thing that you think sounds the best. And also a consideration for the chassis that you're putting it in, what fits? Can you make an X pipe work underneath your car? Do you have clearance for that? Because exhaust systems also consideration for when you're going over speed bumps and that kind of stuff. If the exhaust hangs down, drags on the ground, you don't want to run that. Made the live crew. Yeah, we're getting ready to go. Richard, you're saying we need a bigger cam. Current cam is a 228, 236. Blue collar, for what are you trying to do? Reprogramming the engine with intake and exhaust never is a waste unless you're going too far on the porting. They weren't released in manual Firebirds because they were thought to be marginal under load. Is it a strength issue, Dean, on the Oldsmobile motors? I don't know very much about the 403s. LQ4, stock bottom end, ported 243s, fast, 216, 224. On 3 T4, currently have a Borg T483, shooting for 800 wheel horsepower through a T56. Okay, so what is your question? An S475 will make 800 wheel horsepower. Muffler drone. Yeah, blue collar, you're not going to get 600 horsepower, 6-liter with good heads with a small camshaft. A 228 camshaft is not going to get you there. It's going to have to be at least the low to mid 230s. And I wouldn't change the camshaft with your combination. Well, you got a 4400 stall. That's enough. I put a bigger camshaft into them. And I don't know if the fast gets you there. If you have a, let's see, blue collar. Oh, no, you have an LSX-RT with a big throttle body. Okay. You just need a bigger cam if you want to make 600 horsepower. Bulkheads and internal walls on the later 403s were not bueno. On that note, it is time to go, but I will be back tonight. Thank you guys all. Make sure go check out richardholderperformance.com for all your LS needs, and I will be back tonight.